Quick question. If you had to choose, would you rather have infinite mana with many weak skills, or one insanely strong skill with limited uses? Let me know your answer in the comments below. Anyway, on to the video. The story begins with the villain's inner monologue. He cries out to his parents, sharing all the shit he's been through. About a year ago, when he was living his best life, Truck Kun came out of nowhere and hit him with that isekai DLC. At first, he had no idea what was going on, so he bawled his eyes out. However, after seeing the maidens of that world and realizing there was a chance to not only get bitches but also return to Earth, he decided to lock in. He dived headfirst into grueling battles, doing whatever it took to make it out alive. He also worked on his bitchy nature, doing his best to learn courage and comradeship, traits he undoubtedly lacked as a regular teen from Earth. He understands that some of the things he's saying might sound like nonsense to them, but he hopes they believe him when he says he's gotten stronger, strong enough not only to one-shot Minotaur cheeks, but also to cultivate genuine relationships. Relationships with allies who wouldn't hesitate to die for him should the need arise. Allies who would offer up the cakes should he wish to partake. Of course, it wasn't easy, and he's lost count of the number of times he's fallen, the number of allies he's lost. But he can confidently say he's pulled through more than he's stumbled. And even as he yaps this monologue, he is preparing to rise up again, and hopefully, this will be the last time. After today, he'll finally be done with this shit and make it back to Earth. Back to them. Done with his monologue, or maybe letter, the hero and soon-to-be villain rises to face his last foe. He takes one last look at his trusted comrades before decisively walking into the boss's room, the Demon King's room. As he does, he sends one last cry out to his parents. He begs them to pray for him. Pray that he can defeat the Demon King and return to them. Pray that he can forget all the shit he's been through ever since he came to this world. And most importantly, pray that the Saintess will be too tipsy to make good decisions tonight, because he indeed needed them cheeks. Anyway, the Demon King is waiting, so he should probably get going. This is a goodbye for now from their son, who misses his family and friends dearly, their one and only son, Kim Minsu. After ending his cry, monologue, or maybe letter, I don't know anymore, Minsu proceeds to blitz through the Demon King. He yeets him so fast the scene switches to celebrations at the kingdom. The atmosphere is predictably festive, with the citizens celebrating the Demon King's death. The same is true for the heroes' party, who are having a ball in the palace. Unfortunately, the Saintess isn't drinking as much as he'd hoped, so the Cheek's forecast isn't looking great tonight. However, he'll still be returning to Earth soon, so at least there's that. Realizing he'll truly be leaving soon, Minsu lets out a tired sigh. After all the shit he's been through, he'd honestly never imagined that such a day would come. The Saintess chimes in, saying she's happy for him. For what it's worth, if she forgets all the times he cried like a bitch, she can genuinely say he'd done a great job. Receiving the validation, Minsu immediately starts sobbing. He knew this would make him seem like a crybaby in front of the Saintess, but god damn it, he missed his friends and family. He couldn't wait to be done with this crap and head home, especially now that he realized he'd be leaving this world a tragic virgin. The rest of the party tries to get him to stay, but the Saintess quickly shuts them down. She reminds them just how much Minsu misses his home, so asking him to stay would be too cruel. She rallies the others in bidding Minsu goodbye. Just as he'd been a hero and brought good fortune to their world, she hopes his future will be fortunate as well. The squad chimes in, yelling that it's only natural, since he's the hero, it's inevitable that his future will be blessed and gracious. 3 weeks later, and their bullshit couldn't have been more wrong. Minsu, the former hero, is nothing but a shell of a man. Despair doesn't even begin to describe the pain he's feeling. When he hurried home, what greeted him wasn't the loving face of his parents, but a complete stranger. Turns out, his mother had been killed in a hit-and-run accident. The worst part? She died while handing out flyers, still searching for him. Even with her last breath, she insisted that her son would never have run away from home. After her death, his father couldn't handle the sorrow and took his own life. He blamed himself for everything, believing it was his fault for failing to protect his family. As if that weren't enough, the hits just kept coming. He was expelled from school, and even the teachers rebuked him, calling him a good-for-nothing son, a stain on his parents' legacy. To make matters worse, his friends wanted nothing to do with him. They all abandoned him, offering bullshit excuses like their parents had forbidden them from speaking to him. Just like that, he became that guy. The uncle who didn't fit in anywhere and had his life in shambles. Yeah, it was probably best to keep their kids away from that guy. When everything failed, he hoped he'd get some comfort from his relatives. However, all he got in return was a beating. They beat the shit out of him, blaming him for everything that happened. Because of him, their kin were dead, and the family had gone bankrupt trying to find him. He was cast away, told never to return, even after death. And so there he was, homeless, broke, abandoned, and most importantly, broken and without bitches. He had nothing to his name, and the bottomless pit in his heart grew larger. The more he thought about it, the more harrowing the despair became. Why was a hero who saved the world suffering so much? Why did it feel like everything and everyone had deserted him once he'd outlived his usefulness? How was any of this fair? He sank deeper into darkness and despair, wandering the city like a ghost. Eventually, he lost track of his surroundings and bumped into a man. The dude wasn't having that shit and started bullying him, mostly to show off for his girl, who was laughing her ass off at the spectacle. They called him a loser, the kind so pathetic he wasn't even worth picking on. Hearing the taunts, something in Minsu finally snapped. He flicked his dead eyes toward the bullies and asked why they weren't sad. If he had saved the world and still felt this broken, why couldn't they feel the same? With those words, his last shred of humanity vanished, replaced by a new purpose. He wanted everyone to feel what he felt. Utter despair. The man lost it too and grabbed him by the hair. He'd already been mumbling a bunch of bullshit. Did he want his mouth torn open? Minsu ignored him and called forth his sword, the sword of Durant. Just as the maiden was laughing at him for being cringe and too deep in his fantasies, a sword shot down and blitzed the absolute shit out of the bully. His blood gushed like a fountain, drenching the wench, her laughter dying in her throat. When she finally processed what the hell had just happened, overwhelming terror slammed into her, and she screamed her lungs out. Minsu, however, ignored the bitch and donned his armor. He told her to scream louder. She had to feel the same pain he was feeling. With that, he raised his sword and unleashed a slash that tore through the entire city center. It started off relatively large but quickly bloomed into a full-on fucking nuclear explosion. The explosion was so catastrophic, the entire country felt the aftershock. When it was all said and done, only one man stood in the middle of the wreckage. The hero who had saved the world. The hero who wanted everyone to feel his pain. And finally, the villain who had single-handedly wiped out an entire city. Kim motherfucking Minsu. We get a mini time skip to 3 weeks later. In the outskirts of Gyeonggi province, a stream of vehicles is frantically fleeing the capital. In one of those vehicles, we're introduced to the next major character in our tragic tale, the homie Park Jeongsu. Just like the villain, he's got his own monologue rocking in the background. He says that everyone, at some point in their lives, has thought about the world ending. It might be because of nuclear war, a natural disaster, or even a zombie apocalypse. However, no one ever really considers that it could end because of a... Before he could finish, his mother told him to cut out that monologue bullshit and lock in. Who did he think he was? Deadpool? Upset and low-key embarrassed, Jeongsu flicked his gaze toward his sister, who was bawling her eyes out. She was upset that they couldn't evacuate with their father, who had unfortunately been held back due to some reasons. Being a good brother and finding himself idle after his monologue was so rudely interrupted, Jeongsu focused on cheering up his sister. He told her not to worry. Their father would definitely rendezvous with them in Busan. However, until then, she should try to keep her tears to herself. Their mother was already a terrible driver. Who knows what shit show would happen if she got distracted by her crying. Just as he was about to throw more shade at the woman who killed his monologue vibe, a motorbike rushed by, shutting down the entire freeway. Following the halt was a policeman's panicked voice, announcing that the hero was closing in on them. He instructed everyone to abandon their vehicles and flee on foot. Otherwise, no one would be able to escape alive. The citizens heard hero and death and said say no more. They quickly abandoned their vehicles, fleeing frantically on foot. Just as the officer was about to warn them to slow down, a tank came flying in, crashing the shit out of him. This sudden change caught everyone off guard, and the entire place erupted into chaos. The citizens ran around like headless chickens, trampling anything that dared to get in their way. Amid the carnage, the Park family also fled, forcing their way through the chaos in a desperate bid to survive. At first, things were going smoothly, but soon the younger sister, Dabin, began to fall behind, forcing Jeongsu to carry her, further slowing their escape. Meanwhile, the hero was on the move, swiftly closing the distance on the fleeing civilians, leaving a trail of death and mangled corpses in his wake. Watching the civilians flee so pathetically, Minsu sneered in disgust. The very idea that they still clung to hope of escaping, was revolting to him. Did they really think they could survive while everyone else was dying? Did they truly believe they deserved to live, to love, and to enjoy life while he was out here in the drought, without a single coin or bitch to his name? Nah, fuck all that. He was going to kill them all. As he went on a rampage, the scene shifted to Jeongsu and his sister. Predictably, the young Chad was sweating bullets as he weaved through the crowd in a frantic escape. His breathing was already labored, but he grit his teeth and pushed on. Unfortunately, there's always that one asshole in the apocalypse, and in this case, it was the bastard who bumped into Jeongsu and knocked the bear out of Dabin's arms. It was quickly trampled and kicked under a vehicle. Seeing this, Dabin immediately yanked Jeongsu's hair. The sudden jolt scared the shit out of him. For a second, he thought the hero had caught up to him, or worse, that Diddy was coming in for seconds. Luckily, it was neither, and all he had to deal with were his sister's tantrums. He told her to forget about it, that they could always get her a new toy. But Dabin insisted this one was special. It had been a gift from their father, the last one he gave her before he left. So Jeongsu had no choice. He had to retrieve it. He sighed in annoyance, but in the end, his love for his sister won out. He sat her on top of a vehicle and told her to keep an eye on their mom and the path she took. Then, without wasting another second, he backtracked to find the toy. It was a hustle, but fortunately, no one was dumb enough to get in his way while fleeing for their lives. Eventually, he spotted the teddy and reached for it, just as the hero descended upon them, sword raised and ready to strike. With a single slash, he tore through the area, butchering everything and anything in his path. Blood flowed like rivers, and the entire cityscape erupted into a doomsday-like hell. When he finally came to, Jeongsu couldn't process what the hell he was seeing. The entire area had transformed into a nightmarish abyss, littered with corpses and heavy with the stench of charred flesh. His gut dropped in an instant. Where was Dabin? His mother? His grandmother? Panic took over as he rushed forward in a frenzy, desperately searching for them in the midst of the hellish ruin. Then, to his horror, he stepped on something, his sister's bloody arm. The sight made him freeze. Heart pounding, he frantically shoved aside the rubble, trying to reach her. But all that remained was the severed arm, and a mangled mess of flesh and blood. Jeongsu cried out in despair, struggling to suppress the nausea rising in his throat. He collapsed to his knees, trembling as the reality of losing his entire family sank in. Behind him, soft and deliberate footsteps approached. Minsu, drawn in by the lifeless look in Jeongsu's eyes. The Chad didn't hold back. He complimented Jeongsu directly. He liked the look in his eyes. Eyes that spoke of true loss, true despair. Eyes just like his, devoid of hope, love, and of course, bitches. Jeongsu ignored the last part and demanded furiously, why had he done this? Minsu met his glare and replied calmly, because he could. What other reason did he need? The nonchalant tone pushed Jeongsu over the edge. He snapped, grabbed a metal rod, and charged forward, swinging, driven by a raw hunger for vengeance. Unfortunately, his MC power-up was still on cooldown. Minsu choked his shit. Pause, grabbing him by the neck. Wearing a villainous grin, he taunted Jeongsu, asking what he thought he was doing. Did he want revenge? With skills that pathetic? Before Jeongsu could react, he hurled him into the air and drove his colossal sword straight through him. Pause. The attack knocked the wind out of Jeongsu, leaving him dangling helplessly, bleeding out on the sword. As his vision darkened, for some reason, he decided to continue his inner monologue. He reflected on how most people imagine the end of the world, but no one ever thinks their world will end because of a hero. He apologized to his sister, Dabin, his mother, his father, and finally his grandmother for failing to avenge them. He also apologized to his potential hus for dying too soon, before they ever had the chance to meet. And so, on that day, Jeongsu died, having lost everything to the hero: his family, his life, and most importantly, his future hus. But fate wasn't done with the homie just yet. As he closed his eyes, he suddenly awoke to a maiden calling his name. Turns out, he'd been hit with the Isekai DLC, reincarnated in a new world as a hero, the very thing he'd come to despise. Following the massacre in Gyeonggi province, we get another time skip, this time to 1 year later. During that period, the hero had continued his rampage, and eventually, the government fell. Unfortunately, the collapse of the government wasn't the only crisis the civilians had to endure. Several individuals, just like the villain Minsu, began appearing and joined his tyrannical regime. They divided up the land of South Korea, each ruling and lording over their own domain. Everyone except Minsu, who was already overcompensating with his colossal sword. This part of the story shifts us to Jeju Island, the domain of the golem hero. In one of the warehouses, manned by a drone that looks suspiciously like a wrinkled nutsack, we're introduced to the vixen of the story. However, at the moment, the vixen isn't vixening. She's visibly sullen, mumbling about how she wants to die. Beside her lay a friend who rebukes her, warning her to cut it out with the jinxing nonsense. Did she want all of them to die? Clearly unbothered, the vixen replies that death would be more merciful than the hell they called living. The response stuns her friend, who immediately starts bawling. She reminds the vixen why they fled there in the first place. They wanted to live. But the vixen replies that that wasn't living. If she'd known things would get this bad, she would have ended it all back in Seoul. As the somber atmosphere settles around them, the door suddenly swings open, and in walks Thing from the Addams family. The monstrosity quickly rounds them up, herding them outside like a flock of sheep. Soon, under the guidance of several more things, the scattered groups are combined and lined up like prisoners in a labor camp. When everyone was finally assembled, the ruler of the domain, and the new villain of the story, made his grand entrance. He scaled the crouched hands that obediently lowered themselves into makeshift stairs. Upon reaching the raised platform, the hero accepted their killer salute with a cocky grin aimed at his terrified subjects. Wasting no time, he flexed his power, snapping his fingers and conjuring a speaker golem out of mere sand. Satisfied with the display, he launched into his cheerful speech. However, halfway through his bullshit, he noticed the listless expressions on the crowd's faces and frowned deeply. Why did they have that dead look in their eyes? Did they hate working that much? Or worse, did they hate him? The thought struck him as absurd. In his opinion, he was a benevolent lord. If they'd been under the rule of the vampire hero or the hero of faith, their fates would have been worse than death. They could have been drained of blood, or worse, brainwashed into one of those fanatical religious heretics. He genuinely considered them lucky, but clearly, that sentiment wasn't shared by the subject who kept staring up at him with that same damn listless gaze. Enraged, the hero began cackling darkly. He glared at the subjects, pests who'd clearly forgotten their place. Seemed like he'd been too lenient with them. Well, it was time to correct that. Noticing the hero's raised hand, the crowd broke into a panic. They frantically scurried to escape, each one concerned only with their own life. But it was too late. With a casual flick of his finger, the hands unleashed a gale of destruction that mercilessly tore through the civilians. Their anguished moans died in their throats as their bodies collapsed to the ground, lifeless. Unfortunately, one of the casualties ended up being the vixen's friend, who literally died choking on her own blood. She'd tried to call out to the vixen, but the maiden hadn't started her redemption arc yet, so she nonchalantly ignored her. Up on the platform, the hero kept going, flicking his fingers a few more times, decimating civilians with every snap. When things finally calmed down, the survivors made their way to the farm, their place of labor for the day. Among them was the vixen, still wearing that same sullen, unbothered look, as if her friend hadn't just died seconds ago. As she busied herself with her work, an old lady came forward and filled up her basket. She told the vixen to take a walk. She looked like shit, and clearly needed one. The maiden expressed her gratitude, picked up a tangerine, and prepared to leave. Before she did, the old lady reminded her to be wary of the nutsack drones in the sky. Those little bastards spied on everything, so she better not rub one out in the forest. The maiden said bet and hurried off. She quickly made her way to the ocean, the only place she truly felt comfortable. Come to think of it, that was the reason she had chosen Jeju Island as her place of escape. She'd hoped to find comfort amidst the crashing waves. But now, she wasn't sure she could even call her way of existing comfortable. It was a nightmare, corpses dropping around her like flies. Before she knew it, her voice choked up and tears began to fall. She finally realized she was alone. Worse, she had ignored her only friend in her final moments. That thought broke her, especially when she realized she hadn't even tried to help. Just as she was about to drown in her sob fest, a silhouette appeared, startling the shit out of her. The figure turned out to be a soldier, a brave warrior who'd come scavenging for supplies. He asked for food, and a few minutes later the two were chatting it up in the forest. After eating his fill, the warrior asked for more, not for himself, but for his starving comrades. At first, the vixen hesitated, fearing the hero's wrath if she got caught. But then, as if steeling her resolve, she agreed, choosing to support the revolution instead of watching passively. The soldier expressed his gratitude and made a vow. If she risked her life to bring them food, then they'd put their lives on the line to fight the hero. At the very least, they'd try to reclaim the island. As for what came after, he didn't care. He'd gladly take on that smoke. The maiden said bet and made a run for it. Since the surveillance drone wasn't focused on their location yet, now was the perfect time to move. She quickly returned with a basket of tangerines, a fire of hope and determination burning in her chest. Never again would she watch passively as those close to her died. Never again would she turn her eyes from the massacres committed by the so-called heroes. She would face them and play her part in the revolution. Viva la revolution, bitch. Unfortunately, her heroine starter pack arrived a little too late. When she reached the rendezvous point, she found the golem hero choking the shit out of the soldiers. The revolution had died before it could even begin. Shocked and horrified, she couldn't even react as a golem scooped her up. Pain brought her back to her senses, and she immediately questioned the hero. How had he known about their little "Viva la revolution, bitch" moment? The surveillance golem clearly hadn't been watching them. The hero looked at her like she was stupid. Did she really think he only had one golem? Hell no, he had hella drones. Drones galore. He canceled their invisibility mode, revealing the thousands of drones hovering in the air. Seeing the horrified look on the maiden's face, he burst out laughing. It was all a joke, a bait to give the rats hope before mercilessly crushing it. They never stood a chance. And if she thought it was cruel, inhuman, then she should become a hero and do something about it. Or maybe go back in time and comfort them when they were suffering. With that, he began his torture, squeezing the golem's hand just hard enough to crush her bones. Feeling her life draining from her body, the heroine decided to take the Sakura route. Full, useless trash. She cried out for someone, anyone, to save her. And lo and behold, someone actually answered. Stars twinkled in the sky before crashing down in a blinding explosion. A dust storm erupted, forcing the hero to stumble back. When the air finally cleared, a Chadly-looking figure stood before him. It was none other than Park motherfucking Jeongsu, back from the isekai, having clapped divine cheeks and finally returned to Earth. The hero of vengeance had arrived. An intense yet silent stare-down followed Jeongsu's arrival. All parties involved wondered what the hell was going on. But after a casual glance around and seeing the numerous crushed corpses, Jeongsu began to piece together the details. He turned to the vixen and, like a true alpha Chad, called her woman and demanded an explanation of the situation. Confused and slightly irritated at being referred to as woman, the vixen spaced out for a second, failing to answer the question. Feeling left out, the golem hero barked at the duo, demanding to know what the hell was happening. Who was this bastard, and why was he flirting with half-dead bitches in front of him? Confused and irritated for the second time that day, the vixen ignored the hero's accusatory bullshit and locked in on Jeongsu. Who was this bastard truly? He clearly wasn't part of Minsu's party, or else he'd already be infamous. Plus, he didn't seem to recognize the golem hero either, which meant he had to be new. Either way, this was her chance, and she wasn't keen on letting it slip by. Channeling her snitch no jutsu, she began snitching like crazy. She told Jeongsu about the golem hero, about how he was an underling of the sword hero, and all the atrocities he'd committed thus far. Winding up, she revealed that the hero had just massacred a squad of valiant soldiers and was now attempting to kill a dazzling maiden like herself. Fed up with her nonsense, the golem hero tightened his grip, forcing the vixen to squeal under the intensifying pressure. He warned her to watch her mouth, lest he kill her right then and there. But aside from that, what gave her the confidence to speak so brazenly before him? Did she think this was some casual meetup or something? Jeongsu chimed in, revealing that he'd already understood the situation. The golem hero was an asshole who was using his powers to massacre civilians, but most importantly, he was an underling of that wretched, bastard, maidenless son of a bitch Minsu. Overwhelming hatred and bloodlust radiated from him, and he asked the hero if he'd gotten it right. The golem hero was a little taken aback by his hostility, but soon regained his composure. So what if he had gotten it right? What would he do about it? Jeongsu glared at him and replied with one word: die. Acting on that declaration, he immediately entered a fighting stance. The golem hero responded in kind, and the two heroes officially began their battle. Taking the initiative, the golem hero opened with a dual short and long-ranged attack. He blasted Jeongsu with miniature death rays while deploying his hand golems to crush him in melee. Jeongsu didn't panic and responded accordingly. He spun his spear above him, creating a magical tornado that shredded everything around him. Then he pressed the attack, appearing before the hero in an instant. Without hesitation, he unleashed a crescent slash, chopping off the hero's arms with savagery. Intense pain streaked through the hero's body, and he instinctively screamed. He wanted to curse Jeongsu out, but a brutal kick to the jaw shut him right up. Having subdued the enemy, Jeongsu told him to confess. How well did he know the sword hero? The golem hero responded with an enraged shout, saying he didn't know what Jeongsu was talking about. To this, Jeongsu chopped off a leg, shutting the lying bastard up. With an intense gaze, he warned the hero not to fuck with him. Every time he lied or omitted details, he'd chop off a body part. Resuming his interrogation, he repeated his previous question. Did he know the sword hero, or nah? The golem hero replied that he did, the trauma from the pain still evident. He then glared at Jeongsu, refusing to answer his next question. Where was the sword hero right now? Without hesitation, Jeongsu chopped off another leg, reminding the goldfish-brained hero of the consequences of defiance. Then, as somber as ever, he repeated the question. Where the hell was that bastard Minsu? The golem hero broke into tears, begging to be spared. He'd do anything if it meant he could survive. Jeongsu straight up rejected the offer. First of all, saying anything was wild. He might have been tempted if he were a huzz, but unfortunately he wasn't. Second of all, the hero's death was inevitable. Since he'd given up on being human, it was unavoidable that he'd die here. However, if he answered all the questions honestly, Jeongsu would at least grant him a swift death. The golem hero smirked at the absurd counteroffer and chuckled coldly. He wasn't talking to Jeongsu but to his precious golems behind him. With those words, the hundreds of golems attacked, directing a portion of their forces toward the vixen as well. Surprised by the unexpected stray, the vixen stuttered in disbelief before getting absolutely swarmed. Meanwhile, the golem hero used that opportunity to escape. He deployed his hand golems, using their flight to carry him into the distance. As he did, he reflected on how things had ended up like this. Just like Minsu, he'd also been summoned into another world as a hero. The story followed the obvious tropes. He killed the princess and clapped the demon king. Oops, sorry, got that backwards. He clapped the princess and killed the demon king. Or maybe he clapped both. Who knows? Anyway, he quickly wrapped things up and returned to Earth. When he did, he was expecting a little gratitude, some kind of compensation for everything he'd done, especially since the demon king's next target would have been Earth. In a sense, saving that world was like saving Earth. However, just like Minsu, his reception wasn't all that great. He came home to a father who didn't want anything to do with him. All attempts to get help, even just a basic roof over his head, resulted in utter failure. The government and system failed him, forcing him to become homeless. As if that wasn't enough, he couldn't get work to support himself since he was technically still a minor. Most of the places he tried chased him out as soon as they discovered his age. Don't even talk about compensation for his labor. Those bastards stole that too. Worst of all, he was, as most have guessed already, without Huz. A pitiful human indeed. Back in the present, the hero was continuing his escape when he heard a rumbling behind him. He tensely looked back only to see Jeongsu in a fighting stance, ready to attack. Without hesitation, Jeongsu coiled back, preparing a nasty spear throw. He delivered the golem hero's final verdict: death by thrusting. Pause. Picking up on the disastrous shift, the hero unleashed his trump card, the praying flower attack. It was a devastating blow, capable of leveling an entire city. Jeongsu responded in kind, activating his lightning ability. He coated his spear with it, boosting the output by a shit ton. Then, without mercy, he hurled it forward, splitting the sea and crashing headlong against the destructive laser beam. The spear broke through, cleaved the sky, and pierced right through the fleeing hero. It left a gaping hole in his chest, obliterating his heart and half his torso. When the dust settled, the only thing left was a mangled hero, thus marking the fall of Earth's first villain. The golem hero, destroyer of Jeju Island and countless innocents, had died a tragic virgin. Damn. Meanwhile, in another world, a celebration was underway. It was a festival honoring the hero who'd killed the Demon King and saved their world. The mages and citizens gathered, wishing the valiant hero happiness. They prayed that he'd find as much joy as he had brought to their world. Unexpectedly, the valiant hero turned out to be none other than the golem hero who had massacred thousands, and now lay dying tragically after losing to Jeongsu. Following the hero's death, all the golems under his control collapsed as well. The long-imprisoned civilians on the island finally regained their freedom and joyfully reunited with their families. A cheerful, bustling atmosphere spread across the island as they celebrated the fall of one of Earth's mightiest foes. Meanwhile, in the bushes nearby, the true hero, Jeongsu Park, watched all of this in envy. He envied the families lucky enough to reunite, since that was something he'd never have. A shadow of sorrow streaked across his face as he sighed regretfully at the thought. Lost in his mind, he barely picked up on the rustling bushes behind him. Acting quickly, he thrust his spear, stopping inches from the peeping Tom spying on him. Turns out the peep was the vixen, who, come to think of it, still hadn't been given a proper name. In fact, the neglect was so bad that the maiden herself introduced herself as the field girl. Cringing at the awkwardness, the vixen tried to change the subject and asked Jeongsu what he was doing hiding in the bushes. Was he practicing his stalker skills or something? Anyway, the civilians were curious about the hero who had saved them, so he should probably go say hi. Jeongsu flicked her a dismissive glance and declined immediately. He had no desire to be acknowledged for what he'd done. Besides, seeing another hero would just revive the civilians' fear instead. The whole thing sounded like a hustle, so why should he bother? Watching the slowly retreating Jeongsu, Field Girl flashed a gentle smile. He might say he didn't care, but it was obvious he was just a big, fluffy tsundere. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been so thoughtful and considerate toward the civilians' feelings. Jeongsu flinched at her words, knowing he'd been seen through. He didn't drop his facade, however, telling Field Girl to think whatever she wanted. Besides, they wouldn't be seeing each other again anyway. Realizing she was about to be written out of the story, the vixen immediately locked in. She first asked Jeongsu what his plans were. Did he intend to kill all the heroes? Jeongsu immediately confirmed. With a look of deep hatred in his eyes, he explained his plan. He would kill the sword hero and anyone foolish enough to side with him. The vixen followed up with another question. What was his reason? Revenge? Jeongsu confirmed again. Was there a better reason? He couldn't help but wonder if the vixen was slow or something. Otherwise, she wouldn't be asking such obvious questions. Ignoring the contempt in Jeongsu's eyes, the vixen did the most cliché thing ever. She asked to be brought along. Jeongsu looked at her like she was crazy. Was she really dense in the head, or just suicidal? Why would she ask something so ridiculous? Clearly self-aware, the vixen hurried to explain. She knew Jeongsu regarded her as dead weight, but that couldn't be further from the truth. He might say he intended to kill the heroes, but did he even know where they were? What abilities they had? And even if he did, how was he planning to get to them? He clearly didn't have a clue. That's where she came in. She would be his guide. She knew everything about the heroes and how to reach them. She could connect him with the human resistance, help him acquire supplies and resources, everything he'd need for his campaign. All she was asking for was a chance to be his guide. Moved by her resolve and her bullshit resourcefulness, Jeongsu asked about her reasons. Why was she willing to go that far? To endanger her life? The vixen replied that she was weak. Taking out a photograph of her family, she explained that she wanted revenge for their deaths, but was too weak to get it herself. Therefore, she was pinning her hopes on him, hoping she'd realize her revenge through him. A sorrowful silence followed her words, and the two settled into a somber quiet. Neither the civilians celebrating nearby, nor the heroes across the land, knew that a silent contract had just been signed in the depths of a random forest, a contract that would shape the fate of the world. Like a true Chad, Jeongsu issued the final warning. If she didn't mind being used and abandoned, then she could follow him. The vixen readily agreed. She loved that harsh, kinky shit, so why would she hesitate? Fast forward to a while later, and the duo were seen planning their next move. After careful consideration, Field Girl offered two potential targets: a nearby hero who was a pain in the ass to deal with, or a hero who was further away but considerably less annoying. Which would Jeongsu prefer? Jeongsu answered without hesitation. He'd go for the one who'd die the quickest. Everything else was irrelevant. The vixen chuckled at the reply. She had a feeling he'd say something like that. Anyway, if that was his requirement, then their next target would be the Sea Dragon hero. Sharing more intel, she revealed the lore behind this particular bitch. She was responsible for annihilating entire fleets, making ocean travel a nightmare. Worse still, her ocean dragon was practically a nuclear bomb, capable of wiping out anything it came across. With those words, she couldn't help but think back to her encounter with the Sea Dragon hero. That wench had massacred thousands of refugees on their way to Jeju Island, and unfortunately, her entire family had been part of the unlucky group. Breaking out of her trance, tears welled up in her eyes, threatening to fall. She barely managed to pull herself together and face Jeongsu. The MC, in return, told her not to be afraid of the Sea Dragon hero. All she needed to know was that the bitch deserved death, and they'd kill her. But that aside, how were they supposed to get to her? If they were going to fight at sea, then they'd need a boat. Field Girl smirked mysteriously and told him to leave that to her. She knew exactly where to find the help they needed. Fast forward again, and the duo were now by the shore. In front of them stood a squad of Marines, and behind them a fully functional warship. Turns out they were also survivors of the Golem hero's tyranny. After he'd died, they had reclaimed their stolen ships, and here they were. With a solemn salute, they greeted Jeongsu, promising to be at his service. For the sake of their fallen comrades, they were willing to follow him anywhere, even into the depths of hell. Meanwhile, hundreds of kilometers away from Jeju Island, the scene shifted to a world of storms and lightning. Amidst the roaring waves and towering tsunamis, we were introduced to the target of Jeongsu's hunt, the Sea Dragon hero. Seemingly sensing a foreboding presence, the Sea Dragon rose from its slumber and peered into the distance. The hero noticed its unease and calmly comforted it. There was no reason to be worried. With melons as busty as hers, they had nothing to fear. Okay, she didn't say that, but goddamn. Shifting back to Jeju Island. On the coast where the land bled into the sea, a makeshift funeral was underway. Officiating the ceremony was a jacked-up Marine, lost in his thoughts as he smoked a cigarette. After brooding in silence for a while, he was joined by the captain, who noticed his solemn demeanor and sighed heavily. Suppressing the worry in his voice, the captain informed the Marine that they'd be leaving in 2 hours, so for his sake, and the crew's, he'd better lock in. The Marine ignored the warning and challenged him directly. Were they really doing the right thing? Should they be supporting Jeongsu? Sure, he had killed the Golem hero, but that wasn't enough to decide whether he was friend or foe. And even if he was a friend, What guarantee did they have that he could defeat the Sea Dragon hero, let alone the vastly superior sword hero, Minsu? The whole situation was a gamble, and he didn't know how to play it. He looked back at the graves of his fallen comrades and let the last of his doubt slip out. He wasn't sure if he wanted to go back to that hell, not on his own accord at least. The captain stared at the broken marine and replied with confidence. He didn't know whether Jeongsu was a friend or foe, and honestly, he didn't care. All he knew was that Jeongsu intended to kill the heroes, and that was enough for him. After losing 300 of his men, good men he had treated like sons, he no longer cared if he had to team up with the devil himself. As long as he could avenge his crew, he would be satisfied. When his own time came and he passed into the afterlife, he wanted to meet them with confidence, to tell them that although they had survived, they had found a way to avenge them, and that they had done everything possible to ensure their deaths weren't in vain. Tears welled in the Marine's eyes as he listened to his captain's words. He vowed to follow him anywhere, even into hell itself. No matter where Jeongsu's allegiance lay, he would do his best to ignite the flames of freedom in his country. Fast forward an hour later, the warship was now on the move. In one of the cabins of the mighty fortress, a strategy meeting was underway. True to her position as strategist, the field girl promptly shared intel, a drawing of the hero and her sea dragon. Taken aback by the awful and straight-up garbage sketch, Jeongsu asked if she was serious. Even a kid's doodle wouldn't be that bad. Blushing, clearly embarrassed, the field girl told him not to worry about the art. The real value was the intel. What she truly wanted to convey was that, unlike the other heroes, the Sea Dragon hero was like two heroes in one. Both she and her dragon could be considered individual heroes. Frowning, Jeongsu asked if they could act independently as well. Vixen replied that although it was possible, it was unlikely. In all her appearances, the hero always fought in unison with the dragon, standing atop its head. The beast itself never moved unless ordered by her. As far as Vixen knew, they could consider them a unit, the hero as the brains and the dragon as the brawn. Jeongsu nodded in understanding and asked his next question. What were their attack patterns? Field Girl answered that they were simple. The dragon attacked with its breath and slammed with its body, purely offensive. All defense was left to the hero. Jeongsu frowned. Simple or not, the combination covered both offense and defense. Things wouldn't be as easy as he'd hoped. He was about to press further when a blaring alarm drew everyone's attention. Without hesitation, he grabbed his spear and sprinted outside. What he saw was chaos, a panicked crowd frantically rushing to their stations. Confused, he seized a soldier and demanded to know what was happening, why everyone was running around like headless chickens. The soldier stammered that they were under attack. Countless unidentified creatures were closing in, and it wouldn't be long before they were swarmed. Meanwhile, on the bridge, the captain was receiving a clearer analysis. The ship's radar had picked up a swarm of sea beasts, all charging straight toward them. Terrified, the radar operator shouted over the PA system, warning everyone to brace for impact. The gunners were granted free rein to fire at will. Receiving the order, they muttered, "Say less," and unleashed hell. A thunderous volley erupted, lighting up the night sky. After a deafening barrage, the chaos subsided, and the attackers were revealed for what they really were. To everyone's shock, they weren't even sea beasts, just fish. The crew was stunned, everyone except Jeongsu, who knew it was only the beginning. He roared at the crew to lock in, warning them that the true enemy was finally making her move. True to his words, a massive whirlpool tore open the ocean, and from it rose a colossal dragon. Its draconic roar split the heavens, deafening all who heard it. Atop the beast's head stood the hero herself, the busty Suashin. Without hesitation, she gave her command to her dragon, Dracaris. Oops, wrong story. Realizing shit was about to hit the fan, the captain ordered the ship to dodge, but Jeongsu cut him off, demanding the anchors be dropped instead. Though skeptical and terrified, the captain backed Jeongsu's call, commanding his crew to abide. This time, they were betting all their chips on him. The anchors plunged, rooting the ship in place. Before they could react, the dragon exhaled, spewing a torrent of searing flames toward them. Jeongsu didn't panic. He called forth his second spear, Ansil, the shield spear. Crimson light cracked through the night, and from it emerged an ominous, cross-shaped weapon. Gripping it tight, Jeongsu willed it to awaken. The weapon responded instantly, manifesting a star-shaped barrier before the ship. Still unconvinced of their safety, Jeongsu barked one last warning, urging everyone to get down lest they lose their heads in the clash. His words had barely left his lips when the dragon's breath struck, splitting the sea and shattering the skies. A thunderous explosion followed, lighting up the night, marking the epic beginning of the grand battle for freedom. The sea waves churned as the tremendous pressure from the clashing magic power blanketed the ocean, suppressing all those unfortunate enough to be caught in the battle. Meanwhile, the mortal soldiers were facing the worst of it. Not only could their weak, feeble bodies not handle the strain, but the mental pressure of knowing they were holding Jeongsu back weighed heavily on them. They knew for a fact that Jeongsu wasn't fighting back because he was protecting them, and that only made them feel even more useless. Fed up with being a bunch of useless sakuras, a soldier finally called out to the captain, urging him to give orders. At the very least, they had to do something to help Jeongsu. Hearing the shout, the captain finally snapped out of his daze. He quickly picked up the PA system and relayed his orders to the soldiers on deck. Everyone and their mothers were to prepare for battle. Their target was the hero and her sea dragon. Do everything possible to run interference and buy Jeongsu some wiggle room. The soldiers said bet and set to action. They quickly let it rip, launching a shit ton of missiles at the duo. The missiles corrected their trajectories mid-flight, arched over Jeongsu's barrier, and continued straight toward the sea dragon hero and her giant worm. Noticing the threat, the sea dragon hero immediately deployed defensive measures. First, she gave a quick tease at them boobies, because that bounciness alone was enough to ricochet the missiles back to the senders. Next, she took the more conventional route, setting up a magic barrier. Chanting a spell, she erected the Shield of Atlas, successfully blocking the incoming barrage. The move left the captain flabbergasted, as he hadn't expected her to act like that. Normally, the heroes just tanked missiles without a care, since they never did any real damage anyway. His goal hadn't been to harm her, but to distract her long enough to buy Jeongsu some breathing room. Nevertheless, he wouldn't be discouraged by just one failure. If it didn't work the first time, he'd just spin the block on her ass a couple more times until something eventually stuck. He gave his next order, instructing the soldiers to launch everything. Empty the magazines, dump every round, fire all the rockets, let that busty hero drown in explosions. Cough cough, sorry, I meant very evil hero. The soldiers said bet and let them fly. They unleashed everything on her, blanketing the sky in fiery streaks of rockets. Meanwhile, Jeongsu immediately began to feel a change. The crushing pressure from the sea dragon gradually started to lessen. He soon realized it was due to the unique relationship between the hero and her dragon. Turns out the maiden was sharing her mana with the beast. Normally, she channeled all of it to the sea dragon, making its attacks tyrannical. However, with the bombardment from the ship forcing her to shield herself, she was now diverting a portion of her mana away, decreasing its output. This delighted Jeongsu, who inwardly praised the sailors. Seemed like they weren't that useless after all. He predicted that if things continued like this, the sea dragon hero would eventually run out of mana, and victory would be theirs. Feeling confident, Jeongsu stepped forward, aiming to press the advantage and speed up her demise. Unfortunately, things never go smoothly. After realizing Jeongsu had discovered her weakness, the sea dragon hero decisively changed tactics. Since blocking was putting her at a disadvantage, she'd make it so she didn't have to block at all. The simplest way? Destroy the ship. Grabbing her tossed trident, she switched her grip and entered a throwing stance. Without hesitation, she chanted the Spear of Atlas spell, buffing the weapon and yeeting it at the incoming missiles. The trident shredded through them like butter, setting off premature explosions, then traced a blazing arc through the sky, attempting to bypass Jeongsu's shield and strike the ship directly. But Jeongsu was one step ahead. He quickly expanded the surface of his magic barrier, successfully blocking the attack. Unfortunately, the sea dragon hero still had more up her sleeve. Deploying a divine fingering technique, she flicked her fingers upward, easily changing the trident's trajectory. Then, as if recalling her late-night jerking sesh, she unleashed a combo of finger techniques, going absolutely wild with them hands. The moves were so graceful, I was low-key tempted to see what that felt like. Meanwhile, the sailors on the ship weren't having such a great time. The trident tore through every obstacle, mowing down sailors left and right. The ship descended into chaos, racked by explosions with every sweep of the weapon. The sailors were powerless, massacred by the dozens. Finally, the last man standing ran toward the captain, hoping to shield him with his dying breath. Unfortunately, the trident was too fast, mowing him down before he could fulfill his noble goal. That left the captain all alone, with no one but himself to face the incoming strike. Blood and gore sputtered across the glass, marking his tragic death. Meanwhile, the trident maintained its tyrannical charge, hurtling straight toward Jeongsu. With Dragon's breath coming from the front and the trident ambushing from behind, Jeongsu suddenly found himself in a perilous situation. He had no way to protect himself. The Sea Dragon hero grinned in victory, shouting for Jeongsu to just die already. The trident struck, and blood sputtered like a fountain. But contrary to what we expected, the mangled body wasn't Jeongsu's, it was a sailor's. The man had stepped in to block the attack for him. Clutching the trident with a death grip, he refused to let it move another inch toward Jeongsu. With a resolute tone, he roared at the Sea Dragon hero not to fuck with him. Did she really think she could kill Jeongsu with him watching? Nah. They'd already sacrificed too much to let her belittle them like that. He was a sailor, goddammit, and he'd be damned if he let her trample his honor or kill those he swore to protect. He thought back to his conversation with the captain, how they wanted to live the rest of their lives in service to their fallen brothers, how they wanted to ensure the lives saved by those sacrifices weren't lived in vain, and how they'd decided to give their own lives if necessary to keep the resistance alive. Those memories gave him the strength to hold on, to stop the trident in its tracks, to prevent it from reaching Jeongsu, the last hope of their rebellion. Though grueling, he managed to exhaust the trident's mana and rip control of it away from the Sea Dragon hero. Dying, he cracked a triumphant smile and uttered his last words, asking Jeongsu to continue the resistance and wield the trident well. Just like his brothers before him, he was sacrificing his life for the cause. He only hoped all their sacrifices would be worth it. With that, he breathed his last, going to reunite with his brothers in the afterlife. Jeongsu glanced down at him with a mixture of sadness and resolve. No words were necessary. He would definitely continue the struggle. At the very least, he'd make sure their deaths weren't in vain. With that thought, he grabbed hold of the trident and began the binding process. A cold, freezing aura seeped from it, marking its official debut. The glacial trident had been born. Meanwhile, in the afterlife, the sailor finally reunited with his fallen brothers. He apologized for keeping them waiting, but told them he was here now. Hugging them tightly, he embraced them with confidence, knowing he had kept his promise. He died honorably, contributing to the resistance. This time, he hadn't run away. Shifting back to the fight, we are given a bit more lore about the Sea Dragon hero. Just like all the heroes we've come to know thus far, she was also summoned to another world. In her case, it was to an aquatic world full and brimming with all sorts of marine life forms and kin. Of course, back in those days, she was still a young maiden and not the busty mommy we currently know. However, she still had a little bit of that maiden charm. In a pixelated form, of course. The world she was summoned to was called Atlas, the world of sea dragons, and for some reason Kratos was also there, just chilling, blending in with the masses and trying to fool people with his ridiculous disguise. Someone go tell this bastard he ain't Superman. Changing his iconic paint from red to blue isn't enough to fool anyone. Anyway, as the new hero, Sua Shin was introduced to the royalties of that world, and the one who summoned her. He turned out to be a jacked-up dude, flexing his abs and wielding a trident, the same trident Sua would later carry. Delighted, the King of Atlas asked her how she was doing. She certainly looked way more composed than she'd been a while earlier, back when she'd just been summoned to that world. So, was he to take it that she'd accepted her role as the hero and all the responsibilities it held? Sua replied with an uncertain, kinda. She was still getting accustomed to the whole idea. The fact that she had been summoned to a strange world and tasked with fighting and killing a demon king to make it back home was way too surreal for her. The king consoled her, encouraging her to take it one step at a time. Eventually, she'd come to accept it. But until then, he had something to give her. Something that would probably make the journey more bearable. To Sua's bewilderment, he handed her his trident. He then explained that it was a divine artifact passed down through time and many generations. It was crafted specifically for the chosen hero who would appear should the world need them. As for its abilities, it had many, but one would definitely interest a flatboard maiden like herself. Rumor had it that the trident would contribute to the bounciness and fullness of her plots. But that's information divined by the thirsty narrator, so she should take it with a grain of salt. Either way, it wouldn't hurt to wield the trident. Sua said bet and grabbed it. She soon realized that the trident was way heavier than she'd expected. If the seemingly light thing could be this deceivingly heavy, then maybe, just maybe, the flatboard to busty rumors weren't all that ludicrous. Oblivious to the hero's, or rather the narrator's, pervy thoughts, the king continued with his explanations. He explained that the trident held great significance in the kingdom, as it signified the acceptance of a hero. It also meant they'd support her wholeheartedly and put their trust and lives in her hands. Without a doubt, if she were to accept the trident, and by extension her role as their hero, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say their life and death would be completely up to her. So, what did she think? Would she accept this noble role? Sua decisively nodded in agreement. She wasn't delusional enough to miss such an opportunity. In return, the king knelt before her, officially making his vows. He would be her humble servant, protector, and guardian. He would eliminate all those who stood in her way of destroying the Demon King. Then, as if it wasn't creepy at all that a grown dude was kissing a teenage girl, he grabbed her hand and gave it a smooch. Back to the fight with Jeongsu. Now that we understand the significance of the trident to the Sea Dragon hero, we can understand her ferocity at having it stolen from her. She barked at Jeongsu, demanding that he return the spear immediately. It wasn't something he could so casually taint with his unworthy hands. Saying so, she willed her sea dragon to attack, determined to reclaim the trident no matter what. Jung said, bet, that he'd return it right away. He'd throw it back to her, right through her skull, of course. Enraged, the sea dragon attacked immediately. It blasted a dragon's breath towards Jeongsu, evaporating the sea's surface with its might. Jeongsu didn't panic and faced it head-on. Instead of blocking with his shield, he decided to fight offense with offense. Deactivating his shield, he reared his hand back for a nasty throw. Then, without hesitation, he went on a short trot before yeeting the trident straight at the sea dragon hero. The trident shot off with a booming shockwave, freezing everything in its path. When it clashed with the dragon's breath, it only halted for a split second before freezing that as well and resuming its charge towards the hero. Panicked, Sua decided not to take any chances. She quickly called out to her dragon, asking it to give up on offense and focus everything on defense. The dragon glanced at her and promptly complied. It stopped using its dragon's breath and teamed up with Sua to fortify their defenses. Sua, in return, cast the strongest defensive spell in her arsenal, the Grand Shield of Atlas. It was a 5-layer shield, one so powerful not even the Demon Lord could breach it. Flashing a cocky grin, she told Jeongsu to go ahead and try it. She was certain he wouldn't be able to leave even a scratch on it. Before her words could settle, the trident froze the outer shield before obliterating it. It then moved on to the 4th shield and did the same. Then, as if replaying a scene from the hero's worst nightmare, the trident proceeded to freeze and obliterate the remaining shields, leaving Sua completely horrified. Finally, after exerting all her strength and even using the bounciness of her plot, she managed to stop the trident's charge on the last shield. Exhausted and sweating from the strain, Sua wiped her brow and prepared for a counterattack. But to her shock, Jeongsu, the target of her soon-to-be vengeful dragon's breath, was nowhere to be found. Before she could piece together what the hell was happening, a cold voice called out, announcing that he was below her. Sua quickly shoved her obstructing bust to the side and peered downwards, straight towards Jeongsu, who was standing on ice and wielding a cross spear. It was at that moment she finally realized the intent behind his actions. Jeongsu hadn't thrown the trident to wound her. He'd done so to freeze the ocean surface, to make a path for himself to close the distance, and she'd completely fallen for his trap. Before she could react, Jeongsu lunged forward and swung his spear, sending a demonic crimson wave at Sua and the dragon. The attack was beyond brutal, cleaving straight through the last defensive shield, Sua, and the dragon hidden behind it. It proceeded to cleave the sky, split the sea, and all that exaggerated cultivation bullshit. Finally, the fate of Sua was revealed. Having been split in twain by the slash, she felt life drain from her body. She turned her tear-ridden eyes towards the sea dragon, telling it that she loved it. She loved it very much. Then, as if the pause had been lifted, the duo split in two, their bodies drifting apart in a flood of blood and gore. Meanwhile, we are thrust into another flashback, specifically one explaining the weird relationship between the hero and her sea dragon. After defeating the Demon King in a grueling battle, the hero, Sua, let out a tired sigh. After so much suffering and carnage, they'd finally done it. They'd finally taken down this cursed giant bird. The sea dragon, revealed to be the transformed form of the king, chimed in, congratulating her on her hard work. He then swooped her up, nestling her in a princess carry, which honestly, I still don't know how to feel about. I mean, isn't she still underage? Fucking PDF file. Anyway, the horny king ignored all the red flags and planted a wet one on her lips. Sua, in return, leaned closer, returning the kiss. Then, as if remembering something, tears inescapably welled up in her eyes. Confused, the king asked what was wrong. Why was she crying on such a joyous day? Sua didn't hide anything and shared her worries. Now that the Demon King was defeated, her return was approaching, and so was their time to say farewell. Although she was happy to return to her family, the idea of separating from him, her groomer, was saddening. The king, clearly keen on not letting his investment go to waste, told her he'd join her. He'd follow her to her world. Since he'd already fulfilled his duty as the king of Atlas and the Demon King had been defeated, he didn't see anything wrong with accompanying her to Earth to fulfill his role as her man and she as his hus. The citizens, however, were less than pleased about his sudden declaration. When they returned to the palace, they vehemently disagreed with the king's decision. They argued that it could be dangerous, pointing out that the world might be fundamentally different from their own. What would he do if the world turned out to be uninhabitable for a creature such as him? The king countered, telling them not to worry. If the hero could adapt to their world, what was preventing him from doing the same in hers? Besides, things were peaceful now, and a new heir had been chosen. What other reason did he have to stay? He would rather accompany Sua and live the rest of his life fulfilling his role as a partner. Thus, things were settled, and the departure date quickly arrived. Kneeling before the teleportation gate, the couple officially confirmed their relationship. They got engaged, completely ignoring the wrongness of it all. Come on, man. She's underage, and he's an old geezer with a kid older than her. How does any of this make sense? Anyway, I'll ignore it for now and continue with the story. Contrary to the blissful life they'd expected to live back on Earth, things couldn't have gone more wrong. Shortly after arriving, the king realized his sea dragon physique wasn't suitable for surviving there. It quickly began breaking down, with chunks of his organs and teeth falling out. Gradually, it became incredibly difficult to maintain his human form. Of course, he kept all this a secret from Sua, leaving her in the dark about his struggles. Whenever she asked, he would flash a reassuring smile and tell her he was fine, that there was nothing to worry about. And Sua, being head over heels in love, was too blinded by her feelings to realize otherwise. Finally, when things crossed the tipping point, the truth could no longer be hidden. When Sua got home from work one day, she was horrified to see the king and the condition he was in. The dude was a mess, with half of his body involuntarily morphing into his sea dragon form. Afraid that he could lose control and harm her, the king warned Sua not to approach. But, as expected from a maiden in love, Sua ignored that shit and ran to him. She hugged him tightly and told him everything would be okay. They'd find a way out together. She'd already saved up some money, enough for them to go to an uninhabited island. With no people around, he could freely transform into his sea dragon form and finally put an end to his suffering. They could live how they'd always wanted, together, forever. Though reluctant to separate her from the conveniences of modern society, friends, and family, the king eventually agreed. Returning the hug, he agreed to follow Sua's plan. They would run away together. Thus, the couple hugged it out, confirming their love and their plans moving forward. A couple days later, they officially embarked on their voyage. On a cruiser ship ferrying people from the mainland, the couple were seen blending in with the masses. Clearly worried, Sua urged the king to hold on. They were almost at their destination. Unfortunately, the king's condition had finally reached its breaking point. Before either one of them could react, a massive blast of mana exploded out, leveling everything in a kilometer radius. When the carnage subsided, the only thing left was a transformed king and fragments of destroyed ships and sea vessels. Obviously, the destruction made the news and attracted the aggro of the government. They quickly deemed her a threat, an enemy in the same camp as the slayer Minsu. What followed was predictable. The navy attacked, and she attacked back, leveling everything they sent her way. Soon the seas burned, and her status as a villain was firmly solidified. However, Sua wasn't particularly worried about this. So long as she could protect him, just as he'd protected her when she was in his world, she didn't care what the people called her. She would fight to protect him no matter what. Ending the flashback, we are taken back to the bloody battlefield. Maybe due to his rich vitality, the king, the sea dragon, managed to survive long enough to express his feelings. He loved her too. He loved her very much. With that, the couple died, having suffered a truly tragic fate. It's true what they say. Villains aren't born, they're made. Meanwhile, on another battlefield, we are reintroduced to the cause of it all. Kim motherfucking Minsu. As usual, he's brooding, probably contemplating which city to destroy next, instead of just getting some huzz and blowing off that murderous steam. Soon he is joined by another member of the villain group, a fox-eyed bastard who looks treacherous no matter how I look at it. Unfazed, Minsu flicks him an unbothered look, seemingly asking, "What do you want?" The bastard replied with a nonchalant tone, informing Minsu of the recent news. Both the Golem hero and the Sea Dragon hero had been taken down by Jeongsu, the new hero that just returned. Fanning the flames, he urged Minsu to do something about it. If he left things as they were, then the people would have hope again, and the eternal sadness he'd painstakingly cultivated in the country would inevitably fade. Hearing the words, Minsu slowly got up. This reaction was predicted by the sly bastard, who flashed a cunning smile in triumph. Opening his treacherous eyes a little wider, an act that made him seem even more suspicious, the bastard encouraged Minsu to get going. It was time to bring about the end once again.